Everybody, and welcome to the ALG podcast. I am Frank McCaffrey in lockdown in South Texas. That's the story of our lives these days. We have 34,575 deaths, according to my reports that I'm receiving here on. I believe these are
How many?
CDC. Uh, 34,575 total deaths in the United States. Did I say something else? Maybe I read it wrong.
I just didn't catch it.
Okay. Now, we're joined by ALG President Rick Manning. We ask that you please subscribe. He is locked down in his home in Maryland. It's very different politics between states like Maryland and Texas. Our governor is hinting that he wants to reopen a lot soon. Your governor is being very hesitant. He thinks this is the worst time to reopen. Rick, what's your solution to this debate on whether or not to reopen? I was talking to my mom in Maryland. She doesn't think it's the right time to reopen. Down here, people are itching to reopen. We want to get back to work. We like to work down here. What do you think? Is it the right time to start talking about it?
It's the right time to start reopening in a lot of places. A lot of places across this country don't have the same, anywhere near the same impact from this Chinese-oriented disease as exists in New York City or Baltimore or other eastern cities. And so to try to put the same strictures on people in Oklahoma, Texas, Wyoming, Nebraska, elsewhere where there's South Dakota, North Dakota, where there's really not the same kind of problems as there are in New York City or Baltimore is absurd. And so what we've been saying all along has been pretty clear. This has to be done on a case by case basis with decisions made based upon what's really happening on the ground. And truthfully, in Maryland, those people who believe we should be locking down forever are, I don't know what they're thinking. We're getting 30 to 50 deaths a day, and we're on the back end of the curve right now. And by the time we hit May 1, Maryland will be eligible to effectively start the reopening. And remember, the president has proposed 3 levels of reopening, and those 3 levels reflect different conditions. But the first level reflects the condition of we're on the back end of the curve, and we haven't seen growth in the number of cases over a certain period of time, and that gives you and that signals that this disease is falling off rapidly in your state, and so the risks associated with having a partial reopening are significantly less. So that's your first step that's in there. And some states, they feel like they never even had this disease. They've had very few deaths and very few incidences, and they've effectively shut down their optional medical things that just normally get done but are not seen as emergencies. They've shut down their healthcare system. They've shut down their retail system, and a lot of people are suffering as a result of that shutdown. And that the suffering from the shutdown dramatically exceeds any suffering that's happening from the disease. And those governors should feel free to open up. And if certain parts of their state are basically disease free, and others are are really badly affected, you can do it by region. There's no reason why you have to say, it's a state with a 300 mile on each border, and so we got 200 miles on each border. So you're sitting there saying, well, we got this big giant state, we got a problem in one small area of it. We're going to shut everybody else down because of that problem. So yeah, that's why this is it's a localized plan. It's a state plan that the president did, and it's the right way to go about it. If the people in Maryland don't feel comfortable, and I live in Maryland, if people in Maryland don't feel comfortable opening up, that doesn't mean the people in Idaho or Texas shouldn't open up.
Yeah, and of course Maryland, as we mentioned, has very different politics than a lot of different states, and I'm sure just
Maryland,
about.
here's the critical piece on this, Frank. Maryland and places in the D.C. area in particular have a greater proportion of government workers. Government workers have guaranteed incomes. they get, they aren't at risk. Whether they go to work, whether they work when they're supposedly working from home, all that stuff is interesting. They still get paid. They still get a raise next year. They still get the COLA increase. They still get all that stuff. So so government workers sit there and they don't feel any of the pain of the shutdown. It's the people who pay for the government workers who feel the pain for the shutdown. And so if we really want to get a fair and honest view of what should be done, and you want to change the attitude of people in Maryland, as an example, what you do is you say, well, local governments, you're going to have a drop in revenue of 12% because of this that we can identify, and as a result, you have to make 12% cuts, and that includes personnel cuts. State workers, we got a 12% decrease. You need a 12% decrease in state workers, and to accommodate the cost, the additional, the drop in revenues as a result of government policy. And finally, on the White House end, I think they ought to just sit there and say, okay, well, we started with 3.5%. Let's say hypothetically we get 17.5% unemployment in the month of April. That means the president lays off 14% of the federal workforce and just says, I'm laying off 14%. That's what the private happening in the private sector. That's the increase in the unemployment rate in the private sector. And in order for the public sector to be able to respond appropriate, the public sector needs to be laid off at the same rate as the policies that they're pushing are causing private sector pain. And I guarantee you, if that occurred, the public sector employees who are visibly pushing for long-term shutdowns would be much less willing to do so, because it's one thing when you're just killing everybody else's job. It's another thing when you're killing your own.
Now, here's what our Governor Greg Abbott said. New executive orders. He's canceling school for the rest of the year. That's good news for my son. Actually, no. I think my son was having fun in school, so we're a little bit upset about that. But Governor Abbott said Friday he was putting in place a number of new executive orders that would act as exceptions to the stay-at-home order that expires on April 30th and would outline which businesses can open and when. So expect some information on who can open and when. A lot of people here, I think, just want to get to work. That's the bottom line. It's not necessarily about making money. It's just about having something to do, to get up and get going and make something happen.
And yeah, I think that's right. And Frank, one thing that we have to be cognizant of is, if half of the people who would normally be a retailer's customer aren't comfortable going into the retail establishment because they're afraid, those retailers are not going to be able to hire back everybody that they used to have. They're going to have, they may open up, but that doesn't mean that customers are going to show up. And that becomes and so this is a chicken and egg thing. A market-based economy is based upon two things. Somebody's providing services for a price that people are willing to pay, and people are willing to go and pay those prices and go into the stores. And given that, or go into the restaurants. And given that, this is going to be it's really, you have to solve both problems. You have to solve for both X and Y. You have to solve for reopening the businesses, but you also have to solve for customers feeling comfortable going to the businesses. And that will be a large part of what future investment's going to have to be in terms of our some of the things that people are investing in. That is, if you've got a grocery store, or if you've got a regular store, what do? Retail establishment. Well, you might want to have masks. So anybody who comes in, they don't have a mask, they're issued a mask. You buy lots of Purell. So those are the kind of things that are going to have to happen. You're going to have to invest, like Delta Airlines is, in pretty aggressive cleaning regimes to ensure customers that the surfaces are clean and disinfected when they go into the store. And so you have to be very visible and having people cleaning the various racks the clothes hang on and the like, and around the registers to ensure that people feel comfortable. So those are the things you're going to have to do in order to have customers, as many customers as you started with before all this stuff happened. So
now, here's the old business mind in me. does that mean that you create new jobs, hiring people who walk around with hand sanitizer and
There's
disinfectant
going to be
wipes?
some of that. What you probably will have is just, your normal staff that's going around helping customers. The cleaning always was the last thing they would do. In this instance, it'll be, the customer's going to approach the person and say, "Excuse me," and the person's going to have to stop cleaning to help the customer. So it's just going to be a different emphasis on what customers are doing or what the workforce is doing on the floor. And companies that went away from having much workforce on the floor are going to have to adapt to that and put more sales clerks on the floor. Ostensibly, they're sales clerks, but in reality, they're going to be people who are constantly making certain that the surfaces in their area of responsibility are clean.
And I think people are going to have to see it.
Helping care of customers.
Potential customers are going to have to see it, just like after 9/11.
Exactly right. It's all about visual. Even if they're cleaning with a dirty rag, it's as long as the people think that it's clean, they'll come.
Yeah,
No, I'm not advocating cleaning with a dirty rag, but that's so it's about mindset. It's about making people feel comfortable coming to the store.
yeah, absolutely.
And that's why Delta Airlines has made a big deal that they're going to, clean, do an extensive deep clean of the plane after every single flight, which is going to create more delays. And at the end of the day, every flight's going to basically be fumigated, and so that's what Delta has announced they're going to do to make passengers feel comfortable flying their airline and getting in a metal tube for hours at a time.
Yeah, now the economic toll that this is going to take is brutal, but my guess is we will. I'm thinking positively these days that we'll see that V-shaped recovery. We'll see things come back. It's just, and I'm saying that I think we'll see things come back because I think most Americans forget about the politics, forget about what government or academia or media is leading us to believe. I think most Americans just want to get out and work and bring things back. I really do.
I agree with that. I'm going to do a little real GDP talk here. You talked yesterday about how big Texas's GDP is,
Yeah.
and it's right. Texas has a really big GDP. California would be the 5th largest nation in the world from their GDP, to put it to some perspective.
Wow.
And if California doesn't reopen, that has a giant impact on the national GDP. So if New York doesn't reopen, that has a giant impact on the national GDP. State like Illinois doesn't reopen, has a giant impact on the national GDP. So when you do a cumulative impact of, Texas may jump back to producing exactly what they produced before, and maybe even more. But nationally, it won't look like that because California and some of the other big drivers in terms of our GDP will be lagging and continuing to lag. And as a result, I don't know that we're going to get back to where we were in terms of cumulative GDP when you count up all the states, because too many big states are going to stay closed. But having said that, I think if you happen to live in locales where there is a concerted effort to reopen and to restore free enterprise in those locales, that you will see that V-shaped recovery as it affects your life. But it isn't necessarily a V-shaped recovery in terms of the entire nation, because some of the biggest contributors to GDP in terms of states are controlled by governors who have no intention of allowing a V-shaped recovery before the November election.
Yeah, that does make a lot of sense for them politically, right? One can
Yeah, let's cause pain to the people under guise of fear, and because we can't afford to lose, we want to try to defeat Donald Trump.
Oh, I would not be surprised if that's what's going through Andrew Cuomo's mind right now. Probably.
Of course, because he's hoping now that he might be the guy who gets to run against Donald Trump and not Joe Biden.
Yeah, I don't know if that's ever going to come to fruition. It doesn't feel like that will. There's reasons that Andrew Cuomo is hesitant and his party is hesitant to let him become.
I know, but here's the thing: if he only gets 2.5 months worth of exposure to the critical eye of the not of the mainstream media, they will not give a critical eye. He will be a hero riding on a white horse. But essentially, have his name in the sights of those people who will try to inform America about what he's actually done and who he actually is. 2.5 months, rather, this may be his only shot, because going through an 18-month cycle, I don't think he can withstand an 18-month cycle of betting by the American public of his record. But a 2.5 month cycle after 3, 4, 5 months of him being on TV every day, reporting on stuff and sounding like he's a trusted news anchor, he's going to go in with a lot of people looking at him positively, and that's hard to break down.
Yes,
so this
yes,
may be his only shot, which is why he will push it.
Yeah, and a lot of people really do seem to like Andrew Cuomo. He has that Cuomo name, which a lot of older people remember his father well. In his famous 1984 speech at the convention, where he said that Mr. Reagan is right. We're a shining city on the hill, but there's parts of the shining city that aren't so great, and he points out all the bad things that were going on. It just seems like when push comes to shove, America's going to feel they have to stick with Trump, though, because you don't want to change mid-course when we're going through something like this. And I do believe that most Americans, if you look at the polls, trust Donald Trump with the economy over others. I mean, he just seems to be the guy with a good record and knows what he's doing.
That's the thing that's going in Donald Trump's favor right now. But when people get out of their basements and discover that there's no Main Street left because of this, they're going to blame Donald Trump or their governor, one or the other. And so when Donald Trump's saying we need to reopen, and their governor doesn't reopen, and then they discover all the people they know went out of business, all the people were unemployed. At that point, the blame devolves to the governor. And so there's going to be but some people are going to blame everybody. They're going to say a pox in all houses, and they're going to want to get rid of everybody and start new. The problem Cuomo is going to have is he's going to keep his state shut down, and they're not going to get any recovery as a result. And they're going to have massively high unemployment as a result, whereas the president will be able to point to places like Texas where the unemployment rate will have gone down significantly because of Trump's measured response and guidelines for getting back as soon as possible.
Yeah, and Texas is a very well-run state. I've talked to people who work in the state. They're very happy with the way things go. They really love the governor, Greg Abbott. It's not perfect. There are problems, but I've really enjoyed my time down here. Greg Abbott's a great governor, and he's going to be crucial in the Trump re-election campaign because, like you said, Trump's going to be saying, look what happened. He reopened, and now Texas is back to hire.
It's going to have a lot of examples like that. And it may even be that companies that, so this won't help small business, but larger businesses, suddenly Amazon says, I can't afford to have all my distribution centers sitting in major metropolitan areas. I need to create a distribution center in a more rural environment, which has access to transportation, and suddenly you find that the distribution centers end up being in a St. Louis, Missouri area, or in a Dallas, Texas area, or in or even Omaha, Nebraska area. Someplace, FedEx is in Memphis, so maybe Memphis, Tennessee, which is the hub for FedEx. So there's some things that I think Amazon's going to have to rethink some of their business model, because this idea of creating all your headquarters, your big hubs in highly urbanized areas that are left wing, puts you at a governmental risk for your ability to do business, and that's a risk which Amazon, from a business perspective, should not be willing to take in the future. So anyway, there's a lot of things that are going to happen based on this. I think some jobs are going to move, and businesses are going to shift how they do things based on states that are open or not open, and and we'll find out how it goes downstream. But one thing that's certain is the guy like the California governor Gavin Newsom, he's sitting there saying, Frank, this is unbelievable. In the middle of April, he's making a pronouncement that no mass gatherings for football or baseball games in the state through the end of 2020 at the earliest. And these are the guys who supposedly, we look at the science. They don't have any clue if this disease is even going to exist at the end of the year. At the end of they don't, right now, they're on the tail end of the curve, dramatic tail end of the curve in terms of California. And you could get to May 1 and say, we could open up a majority of the state with no problem whatsoever in California. But by saying that, he's effectively saying, we're not going to have any NC2A football. We're not going to have any Major League Baseball. We're not going to have any we're not going to have any NFL. We're not going to have any NBA. We're not going to have any hockey interstate. And by doing that, and not to mention concerts and all the things that, it's the entertainment industry. So they're shutting down the entire entertainment industry in terms of entertainment events. So what is he doing? And he's doing it based upon projections, once again, that have been completely wrong up until now, and not based on what's actually happening on the ground in California. He's not waiting to see if they've got herd immunity in California, as many Stanford professors believe they do. So he's not waiting for any data. He's just going ahead and, he's ahead of the curve. He's going to be the guy who shuts down his state for 8.5 months without having any data to see that it actually helps at all. And that, my friend, is called a guy who is so power drunk that he no longer looks at, the left supposedly looks at data. He's not looking at data. He's looking at power and control. Yeah. And there won't be anybody left in California who's making anything or doing anything if he continues with that. They will move to Texas, and unfortunately, as they move to Texas, Texas becomes a little more blue. But they're going to move to Texas because simply they can't do business in California, and that's how you take the Golden State and you turn it into an alchemist's dream. Yeah. Because you actually do reverse alchemism. You turn gold to lead.
Yes. Now we do have my son happens to be quarantined with me, and he's turned on his keyboard. You might hear that in the background. We have a little bit of time left. What do you think about like a college athlete who was supposed to have their grand senior year this year, or a high school athlete who was supposed to, do something magical that would blast them off into Division I sports? What do you say to these kids? What do you say to them?
Well, I would say if I were governor of the state of Maryland or the state of California, I would say, go play. I would open it up and say, go ahead and play. You have to look at the data. And if there's areas where there's a problem, if San Francisco has a problem, well, then you say, okay, within this area, you're not going to be able to do it. But you could say to those same kids, you can play all your games as away games elsewhere around the state. There's lots of ways to skin a cat. Not that I would ever skin a cat. I love cats. But but there's lots of ways to deal with it. But to say a state as big as, California geographically is the 4th largest state in the nation. And so just from a matter of square miles, to say a state that is huge geographically, has a 600-mile coastline, 500-mile coastline of the Pacific, and has a similar length on its eastern edge, and is about 200 miles wide. To say that geography, because we've got a hot spot in San Francisco, San Mateo County, we're going to end up shutting down college sports in Orange County, California, which is 350 miles away. That's not just stupid. That's totalitarian nonsense. And Gavin and I, if I were those high school students or college students, I would file a lawsuit against the state to allow them to play ball, because they're denying those kids the ability to get a scholarship. They're denying them their opportunity. It's not just for fun. They're denying them the opportunity to be able to have a funded college education based upon data which does not support doing that.
Yeah.
So I would sue the governor and personally sue the governor, and see if he wants to put how much of his millions he wants to spend to pay for those kids' college educations, because he's going to cost a lot of kids college education. He's going to cost a lot of professional athletes huge amount of money. And quite honestly, given what he said, I don't think Major League Baseball has a chance to even play again unless they go with a model that they were talking about, where they just do a league in Arizona and a league in Florida, and using the minor league stadium system, or not the minor league, the spring training system, and run the leagues that way. And as Arizona and Florida open up more, then those players are able to have more interaction and contacts. Their families move there essentially, and you basically run your major leagues in 2 states, both of which are Republican governors and are relatively open for business.
Yes, I think athletes are like most workers; they just kind of want to go out and play. Really, I mean.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. Even more so because, let's face it, if you're a professional athlete, Mike Trout, my favorite player, if he doesn't get paid for this season because they don't play, it's $36 million. He doesn't make, and guess what else? If by chance, and I feel like calling him up and telling him this because he apparently doesn't realize it, if by chance they play their games in Arizona, he doesn't pay 13.5% income tax to the state of California. The state of California only charges for games you play in California. So if the governor of California tells all these athletes you can't play games in California, you've got millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of salaries that will not be paying 13.5% state income tax to the state of California. So it will cost the state of California a lot of money. So Frank, there's a lot of considerations here. There's a lot of things that are going to be in play. But with the California governor, what he's effectively done is he said, I don't care what the science says. I'm shut the state down for large gatherings because because I can. And he's blindfolded throwing darts. And for him to make that kind of decision 8.5 months before, certainly 2 weeks before we have real data for April, is absurd. And the fact is, if they discover Californians have herd immunity, it's really stupid. It is really stupid and short-sighted. And it can only happen from a governor who is part of the San Francisco Marxist clan that runs the state of California. So I'm tired. Never again let them say they use data, because if you're using data, you do not make a decision that has that profound impact for that length of time based on relatively little data.
That's true. They're using data to manipulate the approval ratings and polls.
We're using projections that have been proven to be wrong. They don't know. I mean, Frank, we don't know where we are in herd immunity because we don't have a widespread test that allows us to know how many of us have had this disease and didn't know. A test in New York or in Boston dealing with pregnant women, I think this was in New York, dealing with pregnant women, found that for every pregnant woman who showed symptoms of the disease, there were 17.5 pregnant women who had the disease but were asymptomatic. If that's true, and that may not be a good sample, but if that's true, that means rather than have 2 to 3% of the population having had the disease, we have 30% of the population having had the disease. And 30% is a short leap to herd immunity, whereas 3%, you sit there and you say, oh, well, we're going to have to stay secluded for 3 years before we get herd immunity through this. But so we don't know that basic fact. And for Gavin Newsom, Cuomo, or any other governor to try to make long-term projections when we don't know that basic fact of how many people actually have this disease and were asymptomatic shows that they don't care about the actual facts, the data. They care about power and control, and they don't mind destroying the small business systems they don't mind destroying their economies, because ultimately none of them are paying a price because they get paid anyway. The unions get paid anyway. At least the public sector unions get paid anyway. And many of the states, the public sector unions are the only thing that matters in terms of political constituencies. So, given that, understand they don't care about facts. And when they come back to us in a year and a half, 2 years, and say we got to shut down the economy again because of a global warming crisis, remember, they don't care about facts. They care about power and control.
Absolutely, and they make some money off it themselves. By the way, they sell their books about it and make their movies about it. They make a few bucks.
No, they'll get paid because they get paid because they'll have investments in certain companies and they know what's going to be exempted, and that's how they make their money. I mean, it's not, this isn't hard. It's they are, it's a legalized criminal class.
All right. Well, it is time for us to wrap up. We wanted to keep this brief today.
I'm not happy though. I'm not happy though. It's, yeah, I don't want, Frank, I don't want my last words to be legalized criminal class. So let me just say to people, have a great weekend. There is, hang in there. I know of one small business person who committed suicide earlier this week. And it was because he lost his business because of this. He lost everything he'd worked for because of this. And he ended up committing suicide. Hang in there. If you're suffering from depression, if you're suffering from anything, thoughts of suicide, contact somebody, talk to somebody. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. It is not a train. We're going to be through this. Do not allow this to take you away from your family, from your loved ones forever. So hang in there, folks. It's your life is more important than any of this. And quite honestly, we're going to be by this. A vast majority of America is going to be by this, at least in the beginning stages on May 1. And, the people who live in states like Michigan, California, New York, Illinois, they have their own political problems they have to deal with. But folks, you just hang in there. Use this time to get closer to God. Do not, if you're depressed, talk to somebody.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Rick Manning. I am Frank McCaffrey in Texas. He is in Maryland, and we ask that you please subscribe. And I agree, make the best out of these times. I always remind people, I remind myself that I went through some hard years during the Great Recession and came out of it just fine. So just remember, a lot of people came out of that actually doing better out of the Great Recession. So that could well happen here. So don't get too down, and things will get better. All right. Have a nice weekend, ladies and gentlemen.